If you haven't watched Pose, which you should, it's great, it's a drama focused on the New York ballroom scene of the 1980s and 90s, a culture that rose out of the found families, known as houses, of Black and Latinx queer people rejected by their biological relatives. Houses would compete in competitions known as balls, where they created the dance form of voguing along with various other aspects of queer culture and language that exist in mainstream culture today. The series draws several plot points and character arcs from the 1990 documentary Paris is Burning, which is compulsory viewing anyway, but also provides a bit of background context for the series. The plot mostly follows our protagonist, Blanca Evangelista, as she deals with the challenges of being a new house mother, competing in balls, living with HIV, and starting her own business in a transphobic and racist world. Various other arcs follow characters such as Blanca's son Damon and her mother and rival Electra. Overall, I cannot praise this show enough. It is hugely refreshing to see a cast that looks like this, with hardly any white people at all, and over half of them trans, dealing with a really hugely influential and important part of queer history. The characters are interesting, the plot lines are compelling, the music is great, and every aspect of the visuals, from the cinematography to the locations, outfits and choreography, is absolutely stunning. It's not perfect, of course. Some of the negatives are obvious, such as the complete lack of trans men, who I'm pretty sure were there even if they didn't get as much attention. It also kind of missteps by associating petty, easily condemnable violence with its darker-skinned characters. Other aspects are more complicated, such as the character's gender largely being depicted in a kind of modern, binary way rather than the sort of in-between man-woman third gender kind of understanding of transgender identities at the time. All of that is too complicated for me to get into right now, and other aspects are just down to personal taste. Like for me, the show was a little bit over-dramatized and ham-fisted at times, but some people are into that. Today, I'm going to deep dive on one very specific character and what she signifies in the context of the show. Like several characters in Pose, Frederica Norman, played by Patti LuPone, is inspired by a real person, in this case Leona Helmsley, the hotelier who garnered a reputation around New York City as the Queen of Mean, went to prison for tax evasion and left millions of dollars in her will to her dog Trouble. In her first meeting with Blanca, who is seeking a location to set up a nail salon, Frederica is shown to be racist, homophobic, and presumably transphobic by extension.
I'm recently divorced. He was half a fag.
Unaware that Blanca is trans, Frederica rents out the property to her. After finding out, she orders Blanca to leave. Blanca, however, stands her ground, and the subsequent legal tussle forms a main story arc of the second series, with much hijinks and extreme measures taken by both parties to score a point over the other. It's fun narrative-wise, but several aspects of Frederica's character and her role in the show struck me as odd. Frederica's character is likeable in a sort of larger-than-life Disney villain sort of way, but there's a bit more to it than that. It's not just that the character has flair or entertaining dialogue. The show goes to great lengths to portray her in a sympathetic light. Throughout the show, Frederica repeats over and over how hard it is to be a woman in real estate and to be a woman in general. We're also told that she too has lost someone she cared about to AIDS. Then, we find out that she's been arrested for insurance fraud and get a scene with her in prison. Here, she fiercely defends her actions, stating that she only did what she had to as a woman in this field of, work. She goes on to say that her only regret is hurting another woman's career to do so, presumably meaning Blanca. Now, this comes out of absolutely nowhere. Frederica has spent the entire time up till this point being an openly racist transphobe who goes to extreme lengths to get rid of Blanca, including setting fire to the property. She barely seems to recognize Blanca as human. Forget a woman, forget one with her sympathy. So her sudden guilt comes across as a weird heel face turn that doesn't track with anything we've seen about the character so far. There is admittedly a sort of worthy adversary vibe going on with Frederica and Blanca, like the two kind of respect one another despite or even because of their conflict. But this is a largely fictional trope that doesn't really have any parallels in real life. In fiction, you can have a playfully antagonistic relationship with, yet not truly be harmed by, your oppressor. In real life, you get eaten. Although Blanca is clearly portrayed as the underdog, even the extent to which she's shown to be able to stand up to Frederica is a complete fantasy compared to the immense power that landlords wield over tenants in real life. If you're here, I'm gonna assume that you already know why landlords as a concept are evil, and if you understand why landlording is bad, you probably understand why it's not great for any show, but especially one that focuses on some of those hurt most by the practice to portray it as good or even neutral. Now, I don't mind that they show Frederica as human or show how she thinks and justifies her actions. I think it's good that she's not a two-dimensional evil villain. They did the same thing with Stan in the first season. However, I think the show really wants us to sympathise with Frederica in a way that it didn't with Stan. I mean, listen to this music.
The only thing I feel bad about, if I have anything to feel bad about at all, is that I ended another woman's dreams.
Frederica is clearly a villain, but the show constantly hints that her struggles are legitimate and worth sympathising with. As a matter of fact, it's almost indicated that her struggle to succeed in a man's world somehow excuses or at least explains her ruthlessness towards others. In other words, we're meant to condemn the fact that she is racist and transphobic, but not the fact that she is a property tycoon. Girlboss and what's wrong with it. Another video by ThoughtSlime discusses a similar phenomenon in Stranger Things, where we as viewers are asked to sympathise with the struggles of a woman above or even at the expense of those of the working class. And I would watch that video for a more detailed breakdown of why the idea doesn't make any sense. But it's something I've seen come up more than once in recent media. One possible explanation is that the writers genuinely want to be progressive, but are limited by their own wealth and status, or just by the West's dominant ideology of individualism, to equating progressiveness with individual success. Through this, we get the girl boss archetype, badass women who succeed not through solidarity with other marginalized groups, but by carving a niche for them in a man's world, i.e., capitalism. But the only way to play that game is to ensure other people lose. This ties into a wider real-life phenomenon where women essentially become the men they oppose in order to be taken seriously. Something we see a lot in female politicians, for example. But trying to one-up the opposition in a way they'll understand can lead to legitimizing their rules, and therefore sacrificing the values that made you different. When that happens, we're left with nothing besides the visual appearance of progress. It doesn't hurt capitalism at all to have female, brown, or transgender capitalists. If anything, individual minority successes help to maintain the myth of meritocracy and keep down the majority of that minority. I'm not saying it's impossible for a rich or a famous person to push for social change, but I maintain a healthy mistrust for anyone in a position of power because of the limits that privilege, that measure of success is likely to have upon their lifestyle and worldview. It can lead to shit like this. Because of the oppression Frederica Norman experiences, we aren't just asked to turn a blind eye to rent-seeking as a practice, but to actively sympathise with her desire to succeed in that field. One that actively creates and maintains structures of oppression, causing particular harm to black and trans people. Bootstraps, bootstraps. The characterisation of Frederica, in particular her sudden heel-face turn in prison, is jarring in a show that is otherwise very much on the side of the oppressed. It highlights and details structural injustice, carefully handles the intersections of gender and race, and critically delivers a damning verdict on the police. So to me, Frederica's portrayal seems extremely out of place. However, to someone who likes capitalism, her characterization doesn't necessarily contradict the rest of the show's values. The show does, after all, put a lot of emphasis on fame, riches, and success. For example, nobody really criticizes Madonna for appropriating Vogue, associating it forever with herself, with no clear credit to the creators, and in the process cheapening the entire culture around it into a fad to be played with by white people and discarded when no longer of interest. The most we get is some accurate pessimism that the mainstream attention won't make a long-term difference to the performers' lives. The audition for Madonna's Blonde Ambition tour, in fact, causes such a stir that Elektra actually plots to break Damon's foot with a hammer so that one of the dancers from her own house will have a higher chance of success. There is a huge emphasis on making it benefits by almost any means necessary. So while the show criticises the structural injustice its characters face, there's still a great deal of emphasis on a Bootstraps narrative, to work hard, to prove yourself, and to escape to the upper echelon. However, it never goes so far as to say that individual resilience is a fair or even viable solution. A trans model has a short time in the limelight before being outed. Dancers are given high-profile gigs and then pushed back into the shadows as public interest in voguing dies. Based on true stories, these arcs reflect the insurmountable challenge that bootstrapping remains for these characters, thanks to institutionalized classism, racism, homophobia, and transphobia. Furthermore, it makes sense for characters who have very little to want to emulate a lifestyle that has a lot. That's half of what the ballroom scene was all about. And in many ways, it was revolutionary. A worldwide movement was sparked that allowed queer people to achieve a kind of stardom and acceptance among their own that was denied to them by the mainstream. And of course, the houses, found family structures providing parents and siblings for those rejected by their biological relatives, both in theory and practice fly in the face of the cisgender white heterosexual nuclear family. Through this, along with things like one character's insistence that agencies shouldn't discriminate against trans models nor hide their identities, and everything about Blanca's character and story arc, the show clearly supports systemic social change. Put it all together, and what you get is a classically liberal idea of social justice. One in which nobody is discriminated against for their identity, and everybody has an equal starting opportunity to climb the socioeconomic ladder. Then your ability to perform, or lack of it, is entirely your own concern. Pose finds that the issues facing queer people of colour are those denying them equal opportunity to participate in capitalism, not capitalism itself. In dealing with the problems faced by black trans people, the show couldn't ignore the problem of housing, but they tackled it through a socially liberal, economically conservative lens. And so one of the cornerstones of capitalism itself was given a human face and struggles of her own. As far as the show is concerned, Frederica has suffered from sexism, which is unfair in exactly the same way as the other characters suffer from racism, homophobia, etc., and should be acknowledged as such. What it doesn't seem to understand is that being asked to root for characters who seek to escape their poverty is very different to being asked to sympathise for someone who essentially represents the system that caused it. Frederica's redemption. A mainstream show on Netflix was never going to go so far as to state that buying up property and charging people to live in it is a bad thing. So with this in mind, it's still really refreshing to see a landlord as a villain, and some of the associated evils out in full. I imagine that by itself would probably have pissed off a lot of viewers who own property. Furthermore, although Frederica is given some redemption in her random U-turn in her feelings towards Blanca, this could actually have played out in a much worse way. It is implied at various points that Frederica will become less awful. For example, when she attends the AIDS charity event that Blanca hosts at the hospital. It suggests that this may be a learning moment for her, which could lead to a new respect for Blanca, which could turn into a friendship or a somewhat positive depiction of a landlord-tenant relationship. Oh god. And in an interview, Patti LuPone actually said about the character, "I would like to think that this woman would soften and become Blanca's ally." Oh no! Thankfully, the hospital scene turns out to be an elaborate ruse on Frederica's part to distract Blanca, while Frederica's henchmen strip the nail salon and change the locks. Having Frederica presented as an ally to Blanca while being her landlord would have sent a much more harmful and insidious message, essentially saying, it's fine to be a landlord so long as you're otherwise a good person. Instead, the show constantly hints at, but never quite says that. And for that small mercy, I am grateful. If you would like to help me make more videos, please consider becoming a monthly supporter over on my Ko-fi. Special thanks to everyone who has supported me so far. If that's not ideal for you, but you do like my content, you can also help me out a lot by sharing, liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. So again, thank you so much for helping me reach the milestones that I did this year. I was not necessarily expecting that to happen. And it was really nice. If there are any particular topics that you might like me to cover next year, do let me know in the comments. Leave a comment with your fingers. Bye.